Azure Integration Services landscape is evolving at rapid pace. One of the recently added features is the support for Azure SQL Triggers for Azure Functions. Your Azure Functions can now respond to the events in Azure SQL Database in real time. This seamless integration not only simplifies complex processes but also significantly enhances the efficiency and reactivity of the application. In this video, we will see how we can configure Azure SQL Database and Azure Functions so your serverless code can respond to the events in Azure SQL Database. Hi, this is Shri. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and help me grow this channel. Let's start now. To begin with, first we will create the Azure SQL database. Then we will enable the change tracking on the SQL database. After that, we will create an SQL table and we will enable the change tracking on the SQL table so it can generate the events when the new records are created or when an existing record is updated. After that, we will create an Azure Function SQL trigger which can respond to the events that are generated from the change tracking. Let's see this in the demo. Before we begin demo, please note that this is still in the preview as of this video. I'm in my Azure portal. I have already created Infacto database. Let's connect to this Infacto database first. I have connected to the Infacto database and I have also created a test table called clients. As a first step, we need to enable the change tracking at the database level. To enable the change tracking at the database level, let's run this command. Now the change tracking is enabled at the database level. Now let's enable the change tracking on our sample table. Let's run this command. Now it enabled change tracking on the clients table. Now let's create Azure SQL Trigger function. I'm in my Visual Studio. Let's create a new project. Azure function, SQL trigger function. You can open the function type and it will be SQL trigger create. So there is an error here. We need Microsoft extension.sql package. Let's install that. Now everything is looking good. Now we have the SQL trigger here. If you see, this attribute has two overloaded methods. Let's go to the definition and the first one is table name and the next one is a connection string in the settings. It will be derived from the app settings. In our case, the table name is clients and let's define the connection string for our Infacto database. Let's create an application setting. Go to the local settings and let's create an application settings for our DB connection. This is our DB connection to connect to the database and we can go back to the function and here this is application settings name. You simply mention the application setting name. So the connection will be derived from application setting and it will use that connection to connect to the database. Since our DBO clients is not of type to do item, let's change this one to be a generic one. Let's call it as an object simply. That's all looking good now. So the changes object contains a list of changes here. Simply we are logging all the list of changes in JSON serialized format. Now what we can do is we can run this function and put a debugger point and we can go to the database and create a record and see if this one triggers. Let's do that. Let's put a breakpoint here and hit the run. We have the Azure SQL trigger running and active. It can listen to the events that are generated from the SQL server now. Let's go to the SQL server and let's create a record into our table and see if this debugger hits. Now I'm inserting a new record into this clients table. Let's insert a record. A record has been inserted and if you see here, we got the trigger, SQL trigger, and we got the list of changes here, change 1. This record operation insert, which is getting logged simply. Based on the business need, we can react to this event and perform appropriate business here. If you see, the SQL change is logged here with operation type and we got the entire record here. That is it for this video. I hope you like the content. If you like the content, please hit the subscribe, like, comment and share. I will catch you in the next video. Until then, this is Shri signing off. Thank you.